and welcome back to Press Review. I'm Carmen Cracknell, and today I'll be taking a look at what analysts are saying on the deepening sectarian violence in Iraq, and also look at developments in Syria as ISIS increasingly loses popular support. But first, let's take a look at the front pages here in the UK. The Independent leads its front page reporting on an exclusive report leaked to the paper which reveals that organised criminals were able to infiltrate Scotland Yard at will by bribing corrupt officers. The paper also features a picture of New Jersey Governor Chris Christie at a news conference where he faced questions about a plot by aides to create a traffic gridlock to settle a political score. The Daily Telegraph leads its front page reporting that new drugs would only be licensed for the NHS if they were judged to be of wider benefit to society. The paper also reports on extremists found guilty of training as terrorists facing life sentences under new laws being drawn in Whitehall. The Guardian leads its front page reporting that thousands of people have been wrongly identified as liable for the bedroom tax, including some who now face evictions or have been forced to move to a smaller property as a result of an error by the Department for Work and Pensions. The paper also reports on the Home Secretary considering reforms to stop and search in a bid to curtail the damage its use against innocent people inflicts on community relations. The Times leads its front page reporting on census figures which show that almost a tenth of babies and toddlers in England and Wales are Muslim. The paper also reports on members of the jury of the Mark Duggan inquest who are to be given special protections after being threatened and chased from the courtroom. Now let's take a look at the top stories in the Middle East. As elections loom in Iraq, Al-Qaeda is facing off against the government in the Sunni heartland of the Anbar province. Let's take a look at what analysts have written in today's press. Saudi Arabia's Asharq al-Awsat features an opinion piece from Amir Tahiri asking, "Is Saddam's ghost making a comeback?" Tahiri says anyone listening to Iraq these days would hear the beating of war drums. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki appears to be preparing for a military assault against opposition groups in the Anbar province, with the besieged city of Fallujah as the principal target. But Tahiri feels that it may be too late to debate the wisdom of such a move or to offer advice on resolving the crisis. However, the best advice to Maliki would be to take a deep breath and reconsider his strategy. In military terms, Maliki may seem to have the upper hand. The new Iraqi military that he controls consists of almost 1 million men, including the regular armed forces and security and police outfits. Maliki also has some allies among the Arab Sunni tribes in Anbar. He notes that Maliki has also secured an impressive degree of foreign support. The Iranian mullahs, who never liked him because they thought he was Washington's man, are now rallying behind him as the only Iraqi Shiite political figure capable of holding the community together in the coming battles. Tahiri believes that by invading Fallujah, Maliki would risk losing democratic legitimacy and, if he won, would become yet another third world dictator holding on to power by massacring his opponents. A ruler who owes his legitimacy to the sword faces the risk of falling by the sword. According to Tahiri, if Maliki burns his bridges with the Sunni community, he would re-emerge as a mainly sectarian figure, a divisive element at a time Iraq needs unity. That, in turn, would make him hostage to Sadr and Hakim, ambitious men with a clerical pedigree that outshines Maliki's. Tahiri concludes saying that Maliki deserved the benefit of the doubt, if only because he appeared determined to help bury the political culture that bred Saddam. Now, as he is dispatching troops to invade Fallujah, he may be in danger of reverting to that diabolical culture. Writing for Al Monitor, Mustafa al-Kadhimi believes that many in Iraq have grown to despise the concept of democracy over the last 10 years in his article, The Crisis of Iraqi Democracy. Al-Kadhimi says in 2003, democracy for Iraqis seemed like a magical solution to the crises and catastrophes that they had inherited from Saddam Hussein's dictatorship. They thus tried to freely express their opinions to the point of sometimes practicing democracy with a measure of abandon. By 2013, however, their views had changed as new ideas had surfaced whereby somehow, and in some respects many, seem to feel that democracy should be abandoned for the sake of security. Al-Kadhimi says the major reaction against democratic tendencies in the Iraqi political milieu, which has been reflected in the public opinion in recent years, can be explained by the fact that Iraqis have never truly engaged in the democratic life. They rather merely adopted some of its aspects, such as elections. Al-Kadhimi adds that one must not consider political consensus in Iraq to be a problem. Rather, the real problem lies in its implementation and its transformation into the division of spoils among parties within the context of their fundamental disagreements over the bases required to form a state. He adds that the search for a new style of governance in Iraq based on a system of rule by the political majority cannot be successful until the goals of consensual democracy are attained. Adversaries must agree on common rules and red lines representing the bare minimum needed to guarantee the nation's sovereignty, territorial integrity, equitable sharing of wealth, and mechanisms for proper governance. Al-Kadhimi concludes that today, in light of the murky atmosphere following the Anbar battle, Iraq needs to move away from the misconceptions that have permeated its society through its political and cultural elites and restore the standing of democracy as a solution and not a problem. Short of this, one cannot move forward or dream of a unified geographical entity or a future common to all. Lebanon's Daily Star features an article from David Ignatius looking at Iran and the US's role in Iraq. In his article, US disregard of Iraq allowed sectarian chaos to grow. Ignatius says 4 years ago, Al-Qaeda appeared to have been destroyed in Iraq. This week, fighters from the group captured Fallujah, a city where hundreds of Americans were killed or wounded. How did this stunning reversal of fortunes happen? Like everything else about Iraq, this is a tragic and confusing story. But 2 points seem clear. First, that the Obama administration, in its rush to leave the country, allowed the sectarian Shiite government of Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki to undo many of the gains made against al-Qaeda. And second, Iran has waged a brilliant covert action campaign that turned Maliki and Iraq into virtual clients of Tehran, and in the process alienated Sunnis and pushed them towards extremism. According to Ignatius, Maliki's new government has played a particularly vengeful sort of politics. The government reneged on promises to pay the Sunni tribal militia that General David Petraeus had mobilised in 2007 and 2008 to battle al-Qaeda in Fallujah and other areas of Anbar province. Many Sunnis, fearing that Maliki's Shiite government was simply a tool of Iran, began turning back towards sectarian warfare. Ignatius believes that the sectarian cleavage in Iraq has widened since the US departed. With Iraqi Shiites pulled towards Iran, Sunnis were drawn back toward the jihadist orbit, especially after Syria lurched into civil war. He adds that al-Qaeda's resurgence in Anbar has been chilling. Last week, hundreds of fighters, travelling in about 75 armed trucks, surged into Ramadi and took over police and gas stations there. Ramadi was largely cleared this week thanks to Sunni tribal fighters. Fallujah will be harder to liberate. Ignatius concludes, taking a look at the upcoming elections due to be held in April, saying that it's a mark of Iran's tactical skill that Tehran is said to be abandoning Maliki and searching for a new client. America is picking up the slack, once more supplying Maliki with advice and weapons. The Iranians, it must be said, play the Iraqi game with a finesse and staying power the US has never matched. Joining us on the show today to discuss the current situation in Iraq is political analyst Hassan Khatib. Thank you very much for joining us, Hassan.
Thank you for having me.
In light of the current situation in Fallujah, David Ignatius has written an article in Lebanon's Daily Star in which he says that the departure of US forces allowed Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki to undo any gains against al-Qaeda, which is part of the reason for what is going on in the town today. Would you agree with this?
Not entirely. I think the reason why there's been a huge upsurge in sectarianism now in last year in 2013 and in 2012 is not primarily because just put the blame on the Iraqi government and because they haven't yet made if you like policies which they try tried to make the sectarianism, fall. But the problem here isn't so much, as I said, with the Iraqi government. Ever since even under the military occupation of America, when they were in Iraq, the sectarian violence and the bombings that were happening were actually very high. And then they started to subside ever since the Americans started to withdraw. And it was only during the violence in Syria in 2012 and then in 2013 did we start to see a flare of sectarian violence happening more so in Iraq. And it's primarily because of the political strategies of America in that region, that they wanted to create the division that's happening right now, backed by the Saudis and the Israelis. And obviously the American plans have backfired, and they've noticed that the Takfiri militants or the extremist militants inside Syria and Iraq are starting to get a strong hold in those areas. And it's primarily because of that, primarily because of what's happening in Syria, primarily because the Saudis are also very worried about the growing influence of Iran and their allies in the region. And that's what Saudi Arabia wants to do. They want to try to limit the growing influence of Iran, of Iraq as well, and of Hezbollah in Lebanon. And their strategy has been to try and divide and to cause this sectarianism and to really wreak havoc in this region, because they're quite worried in the future that one day Saudi Arabia will not become a country anymore. It will be divided into many different countries, and that's a strong possibility that could happen in the future. So this is where I think most of the blame should be put. It should be put on the fact that Saudi Arabia, along with Israel, are trying to create this sectarianism, which is now really flaring up inside Iraq. So that's I think what I would conclude over what's happening.
And do you think Maliki will use military force against the opposition groups in Anbar? And if so, what would be the consequences?
Well, he has used military force, and he is using military force at the moment, and he's now brought up a huge campaign to try and clear the area, the Al-Anbar province, from these Takfiri militants who have really gained a stronghold over the past year or so. And at the moment, right now, we've seen fighting clashes between the government and the Takfiri militants, and he's also got on board the Sunni population inside the Al-Anbar province. There was a time when there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the Iraqi government. The Sunni population, if you like, inside Al-Anbar and Salahuddin province in Iraq were not satisfied with what they were getting, and they tried to side with some of these Takfiri militants. But now they've noticed that this is not the right thing to do, and they would rather have Maliki in power than to be ruled under these Takfiri extremist militants. So they're also helping the Iraqi government in actually cleansing and fighting off these Takfiri militants. And a few of those militants have actually been captured by the Iraqi forces, and they've admitted that they were very close in fact, not only controlling the whole region, but also in actually establishing an independent state. Al-Anbar was actually, in the next sort of 2 or 3 weeks, if Maliki didn't intervene and didn't get his army to go inside the province to, fight these Takfiris, they would have been very close to getting a state. And Saudi Arabia would have been the first country to recognize it, because that's what Saudi Arabia wants. They want to try and make Al-Anbar province part of their own control. So this tactic of Maliki going into Al-Anbar province was very crucial, because they would have probably lost Al-Anbar, and the Takfiris over there would have been, gaining a lot of support and a lot of military support from other countries, and including Saudi Arabia. So it was vital that this had to be stopped. Otherwise, there would have been huge consequences in the region.
And with general elections coming up in April, what do you think of Maliki's chances of being re-elected for a third term?
At the moment, of course, what's been happening in the wake of what's happening in Al-Anbar province, there's now been a huge support, obviously, for the government. It's taken them a long time to actually deal with these terrorists and the sectarian militants inside Anbar province. And there was a lot of criticism for him not doing anything. And now I think he's understood the danger, and now he's done something, and he's obviously got a lot of support. But the thing here is that the Iraqi government, obviously the Shia bloc, if you like, the Shia make up more than 60% of Iraq. They are made up of various different political parties, and Maliki is part of the State of Law Party in Iraq, and there's other, leaders, and there are other parties in the south of Iraq and in Baghdad, etc. But they all make up the Shia bloc, which makes most of the seats in parliament. So, and I think whether it's Maliki or whether it's someone else who will come into power in the next elections, what we do know is that it's pretty much going to be a Shia bloc that will be in power. Now, Iran are thinking of maybe they backed, for instance, Al-Hakim in the last elections. He's brought a few votes in, but I think maybe over what's happening now, I think more people may be inclined to maybe look for alternatives or maybe to stick with Maliki. But whatever does happen, if there is obviously no huge, counterfeit happening in elections, we'll probably see a Shia bloc possibly headed by Maliki. But it's, developments on the ground in Iraq could, drastically change in the next few months. Yeah. We still have just under, 4 months to the election. So anything could happen at the moment. It's looking more likely than that Maliki may hold on to power.
Thank you very much, Hassan, for joining us. That was political analyst Hassan Al-Khatib. Now let's continue with our next top story in the Middle East. With the Islamist group ISIS fast losing support on the ground in Syria and the inclusion of Iran at Geneva II being hotly debated, let's see what the papers are saying. Our Monitor features an article titled "ISIS Foreign Fighters Spur Backlash in Iraq and Syria," which says many Sunni Iraqis and Syrians are fighting against the organisation. The author Sahar Husub writes that the rising influence of ISIS was based on two main factors. First, ISIS is a transnational organisation operating across borders and benefiting from its ability to manoeuvre, given the fact it has bases in Iraq and Syria. Second, the sectarian conflict has been gaining ground in the region, providing fertile soil for the organisation to recruit and gather sympathisers. However, ISIS has been suffering major setbacks recently, as Husub writes. In Syria, ISIS faced military setbacks in several regions, such as the Aleppo countryside and Raqqa, not to mention signs of division within its ranks when some of its members defected to join Jabhat al-Nusra, which serves as the Syrian arm of Al-Qaeda. Husub added, ISIS has failed to mobilise the Sunni population behind its militant leadership. One of the organisation's strong characteristics was its ghost-like nature and ability to benefit from the broad discontent of Sunnis against the government in Iraq. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki to secure safe haven. Husub concludes, it appears that ISIS is engaging in one of its toughest battles, and it would be difficult to imagine it winning in the light of the growing agreement to fight against it at the domestic, regional and international levels, adding that other opposition groups feel ISIS has tarnished their reputation and jeopardised their negotiating stance at Geneva too. The Economist features an editorial opinion piece titled "The Jihadists May Have Gone Too Far," saying that from Baghdad to Beirut, a growing backlash against the most extreme of the jihadists may change the course of civil wars in Syria and Iraq. The article says about ISIS, better armed and financed, it has encroached steadily into areas freed from government control by other rebel groups, enforcing harsh state-like authority along the Euphrates Valley and across much of the north, but the group's rapid rise may now be over. The article adds, today ISIS's fighters, who include as many as 7,000 would-be jihadists from across the globe, face battles on three fronts. In Syria, a wave of disgruntlement with the group turned into a tsunami after December 31st, when its men returned the torture-marked corpse of a doctor-cum-commander with Ahrar al-Sham, a Salafist rebel group which had hitherto been an ally. The article adds a final provocation came when ISIS abducted 5 employees of Médecins Sans Frontières, a French-founded charity that is one of the few aid organisations still willing to work inside Syria. Regarding the ISIS position on the ground, the article says in Raqqa, the biggest town wholly controlled by the opposition, most recently by ISIS. Its fighters are now said to be holding out in a single building. The group is also said to have lost all but one of the border crossings to Turkey it once held, as well as its HQ in the rebel-held half of Aleppo, Syria's biggest city. The article adds ISIS may have spread itself too thin by moving fighters from Syria to Iraq. Yet if some reports prove credible, the group has opened a third Levantine front in Lebanon. In unverified recordings, ISIS claimed responsibility for a car bomb on January the 2nd, which targeted loyalists to Hezbollah. The article says that although some Sunnis have embraced ISIS, few agree with its radical ideas and methods, as well as its reliance on foreign fighters. Its imprisonment of scores of aid workers and journalists, as well as Syrian activists and minority Kurds, Christians and Alawites, has tarnished the rebel movement as a whole, frightening off the foreign press and would-be providers of aid, especially from Western countries. The article concludes, Syria's rebels are united by little more than shared dislike for ISIS. The West has become warier of getting involved in the region. As France's war in Mali shows, military action tends to suppress rather than eradicate groups, benefiting from a power vacuum across the region. Gulf News has published the article, Rouhani says Syria talks will fail without Iran, saying that Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said Thursday that Geneva too will fail if Tehran, Damascus's main regional ally, does not participate. The article adds the remarks came ahead of a meeting Monday at which Russia and the US are to discuss Tehran's possible involvement in the talks set to start in Montreux, Switzerland on January 22nd. Rouhani is quoted as saying to Russian President Vladimir Putin, any trans-regional meeting that is not attended by influential players will be unable to solve the Syria crisis. Thus, the Geneva II conference has already failed without it even being started. The article adds invitations to Geneva II, already delayed by months, have been sent to 30 possible participants, but Iran, a staunch supporter of President Bashar al-Assad's regime, is not on the list, according to the UN. On Monday, the Islamic Republic brushed aside a US suggestion that it play a sideline role within the negotiations, with Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Marzieh Afgham calling the proposal insulting. The article further added, Russia has been one of the principal backers of Iran's inclusion in the talks, which aim to engage representatives of the Syrian regime and members of the opposition in direct talks for the first time. Putin is quoted as saying, we believe any preconditions for Iran's participation are useless and unconstructive, a reference to Tehran's refusal to sign up to a June 2012 accord calling for a transitional government to replace the Assad regime. Now let's take a look at the top headlines from international papers. China's Shanghai Daily leads its front page with the headline, Director fined $1.2 million for his extra children. The International New York Times leads its front page with the headline, Freer reigns for African artists. The UAE's Gulf News leads its front page with the headline, Musharraf ordered to appear in court. And finally, Israel's Jerusalem Post leads its front page with the headline, Sharon clings to life as his condition deteriorates. For more updates, please visit levant.tv. That's all we have time for on today's show. Please join us Monday. Goodbye.